The grand courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and spectators, all focused on the trial of the century. At the center of it all was a wealthy, influential businessman, his face calm but smug, awaiting the judge's final verdict. The air was thick with tension as the judge shuffled through his papers, preparing to speak. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors burst open with a loud bang. All eyes turned to a young black boy, barely 14, standing at the entrance, panting, his fists clenched. "I have proof he lied," the boy shouted, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Gasps echoed across the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief. The businessman stiffened in his chair, his composed facade cracking for just a moment. The judge, startled but composed, slammed his gavel to quiet the room. "Order in the court," he commanded, before turning his sharp gaze to the boy. "Explain yourself, young man. What proof are you talking about?" The boy hesitated, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath, but his eyes burned with determination. The room waited in stunned silence, hanging on the boy's every move as the truth threatened to unravel. The boy's name was Malik, a smart and curious 14-year-old living in a cramped one-room apartment with his mother, Lila. She worked tirelessly as a cleaner at the sprawling mansion of the same wealthy businessman now on trial. Their days were simple but hard, as Lila often came home late, exhausted from scrubbing floors and washing windows. Despite their struggles, she always told Malik to stay honest and strong, no matter how cruel the world seemed. One night, while waiting for his mother to finish work at the mansion, Malik wandered the grand hallways. He was drawn to a muffled argument coming from the office. He hid behind the door and listened as the businessman yelled at someone on the phone. "If this gets out, I'm finished. Erase everything, emails, records, all of it. I don't care what it takes." Malik froze, his heart pounding. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but the anger and fear in the businessman's voice told him it was serious. Malik couldn't sleep that night. His mother, unaware of what he'd overheard, kissed him goodnight and reminded him to stay focused on school. But curiosity burned in his mind. The next day, while his mother cleaned the mansion, Malik returned to the office. This time, he noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, he found a small USB drive marked with a single word: records. His hands trembled as he slipped it into his pocket and left quietly. At home, Malik plugged the drive into an old laptop. His eyes widened as he saw folders labeled fake transactions and bribes. The documents inside detailed how the businessman had funneled money through fake accounts and bribed officials to hide his crimes. Malik's heart raced. He realized he was holding the key to exposing the truth, but he also knew the danger that came with it. That evening, Malik tried to tell his mother what he had found, but she stopped him mid-sentence. "Malik, don't meddle in things that don't concern us," she warned, her voice shaking. "These people are powerful. If they find out you're involved, they won't think twice about hurting you, or me." But Malik couldn't let it go. He knew the businessman was a fraud, and his lies were ruining lives. Despite his mother's warnings, he decided he had to do something. Over the next few days, Malik began researching the trial, learning everything he could about the case and the evidence that was already presented. He knew his discovery could change everything, but he also feared what might happen if he spoke up. Malik couldn't shake the weight of what he had discovered. Every time he thought about the businessman sitting in court, smug and confident, while innocent people suffered, his resolve hardened. But the danger loomed large. He knew the businessman had resources, power, and connections that could crush anyone who dared to challenge him. Late one night, while his mother was asleep, Malik sat at their small kitchen table with the USB drive in his hand. He stared at the files again, rereading the incriminating emails and fake financial records. Every word felt like a puzzle piece fitting together, confirming the businessman's guilt. But what could a poor boy like him do? Who would even believe him? The next day, Malik decided to take a risk. He walked to the neighborhood library where he could use their computer without drawing suspicion. He searched for lawyers involved in the trial and found the contact information for a public defender known for taking on tough cases. Nervously, he drafted an email explaining what he had discovered and attached a few of the documents from the USB drive. His hands shook as he clicked send, knowing there was no turning back. Hours later, his phone buzzed. It was an email response from the lawyer, requesting a meeting. Malik's heart raced. That evening, he snuck out of the house to meet the lawyer at a nearby coffee shop. The man listened intently as Malik explained everything, from overhearing the conversation to finding the USB drive. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You're brave, kid," he said, "but you have to understand this isn't just evidence. It's a target on your back. If this gets out, the people protecting him won't hesitate to come after you and your family." Malik's stomach turned, but he nodded. "I know it's dangerous," he said, "but if I don't do something, he'll get away with it. My mom always says we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." The lawyer agreed to help, but warned Malik to be cautious. Over the next few days, they worked together to verify the evidence and strategize how to present it in court. But word must have leaked, because one evening, Malik returned home to find two men waiting outside their apartment. They were tall, dressed in dark suits, and their expressions were cold and threatening. One of them spoke in a low voice. "You've been poking around where you don't belong, kid. Drop it or you'll regret it." Malik froze, but his mother stepped outside just in time, pulling him back inside and locking the door. That night, Malik and his mother argued. She begged him to let it go, to destroy the USB and stay quiet. But Malik couldn't. He knew the truth, and he couldn't live with himself if he let it stay hidden. "I have to do this, Mom," he said, tears in his eyes. "For you, for everyone he's hurt." As the trial drew closer to its verdict, Malik felt the pressure building. He knew time was running out, and if he didn't act soon, the businessman would walk free. The threats scared him, but his determination was stronger. He decided that no matter the cost, he would expose the truth. As the threats against them grew more severe, Malik's mother, Lila, decided she had to protect her son at all costs. She packed his belongings into a small bag and told him he was going to stay with her sister in another city for a while. "Malik, I can't let them hurt you. You're my world," she said, her voice trembling as she handed him the bag. Malik protested, tears welling up in his eyes. "Mom, you don't understand. If I don't do this, he'll get away with everything. He'll keep hurting people, and no one will stop him." But Leela was resolute. "You've done enough, Malik. You're just a boy. This isn't your fight." She hugged him tightly, her hands shaking as she tried to hold back her own fear. The next morning, as Malik reluctantly prepared to leave, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black car parked outside their apartment. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to the businessman's henchman. His stomach dropped as he realized they were being watched. Before they could leave, the two men from before approached their door. Lila stood between them and Malik, her voice steady despite her fear. "Leave my son out of this," she said. "He's just a child." One of the men sneered. "That child knows too much. If you want to keep him safe, make sure he forgets everything he's seen." They left, but the warning hung heavy in the air. Malik looked at his mother, guilt and determination battling inside him. He couldn't let her take all the risks alone. That night, while Lila slept, Malik slipped out of the apartment with the USB drive in his pocket. He knew he had to act quickly before it was too late. Malik found himself outside the lawyer's office, the streets quiet in the dead of night. The lawyer had warned him not to act alone, but Malik had no choice. He slid a note and the USB under the lawyer's door, hoping it would reach him in time. The next day, Malik returned home to find his mother visibly shaken. The businessman's men had come back, this time ransacking their apartment and leaving a clear message. Drop the evidence, or else. Lila sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Malik," she said softly, "they won't stop. You have to go. I'll handle this." Malik's heart broke as he saw the fear in her eyes. "I can't leave you, Mom. We have to stand together." But Lila shook her head. "You're brave, my son, braver than anyone I know. But if something happens to you, I won't survive it. Please, just go. Promise me you'll stay safe." Reluctantly, Malik agreed. As he left the apartment, he looked back one last time, vowing silently to make things right. He knew his mother's sacrifice was her way of protecting him, but he also knew he couldn't let her bear the burden alone. The courtroom was tense as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Reporters whispered among themselves, cameras flashed, and the defendant, the powerful businessman, sat confidently with his team of high-priced lawyers. Malik, now seated in the back row, clutched the USB drive tightly in his hand. His heart raced, but his resolve was unshakable. As the judge began to speak, Malik stood up, his voice trembling, but loud enough to stop everyone in their tracks. "Wait!" he shouted. "I have proof that he lied!" All eyes turned to him. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as murmurs filled the air. The businessman's smug expression faltered for the first time, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" the judge demanded, slamming his gavel. "Young man, you'd better have a good reason for this interruption." Malik stepped forward, his legs shaking but his voice steady. "I have evidence that proves he's guilty. Emails, transactions, everything." He held up the USB drive, his small hand trembling as he spoke. The room erupted into chaos. The businessman's lawyers immediately objected, calling Malik's actions a distraction and an attempt to derail the trial. The judge raised his hand, silencing the courtroom. "This is highly irregular, but given the severity of the claims, I'll allow it." He gestured for the bailiff to retrieve the USB. As the files were projected onto the courtroom screen, the tension was palpable. The first document appeared. An email exchange between the businessman and his accountant, detailing fake transactions and bribes. The room fell silent as the damning evidence continued to unfold. More emails, financial spreadsheets, and incriminating notes appeared on the screen, painting a clear picture of fraud and corruption. The businessman's lawyers scrambled to object, claiming the evidence was fabricated. But the judge leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. "These are official documents," he said, his tone sharp. "They appear authentic. Counsel, do you have an explanation for this?" The businessman stammered, his confidence shattered. This is ridiculous. This boy is lying. He's just a kid." Malik stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension. "I found this on a USB drive in your office. I heard you talking about erasing the evidence. You thought no one would find out, but I did." The businessman shot him a glare that could cut glass, but Malik didn't flinch. The judge turned to the defendant. "Is this true? Did you try to destroy evidence?" Before the businessman could answer, the courtroom door opened and Lila walked in, escorted by the lawyer Malik had contacted. She stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Your Honor," she said, "my son is telling the truth. He risked his life to bring this evidence forward, and I can confirm that we were threatened to stay silent." The courtroom buzzed with shock as the judge called for order. The businessman's defense crumbled as the evidence piled up, and his lies were exposed for everyone to see. The courtroom was still buzzing with murmurs as the businessman sat frozen, his confidence shattered. The judge slammed his gavel once more, calling for order. "This court will not tolerate lies and manipulation," the judge said firmly, his gaze piercing through the defendant. "Given the overwhelming evidence and the bravery of this young man, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into these allegations." The businessman's lawyers attempted to protest, but the judge silenced them with a wave of his hand. "This trial will be adjourned until all evidence is reviewed thoroughly," he declared. Malik stood silently, his heart racing as he watched the man who had threatened his family lose his composure for the first time. The businessman turned to his lawyers, shouting angrily, but it was clear the case had shifted dramatically. Lila approached the witness stand, her voice shaking as she described the threats they had received. "They came to our home, Your Honor," she said. "They told us to stay silent, but my son couldn't. He knew what was right, and he couldn't live with himself if he didn't speak the truth." Tears filled Malik's eyes as his mother spoke, her words full of pride and pain. The judge looked at her with respect. "Your son has shown incredible courage," he said. "Both of you have." As the courtroom emptied, reporters swarmed Malik and Lila, eager to capture the story of the young boy who had exposed corruption at the highest level. Malik stayed close to his mother, overwhelmed by the attention, but proud of what they had accomplished. Later that evening, back at their apartment, the lawyer visited them with good news. "The businessman's assets are being frozen, and law enforcement is involved now," he explained. "You've not only saved yourselves, but countless others he would have hurt." Malik smiled, relief washing over him. "It was worth it," he said, looking at his mother. "We did the right thing." The next day, Malik returned to his normal life. But things were different. People in his neighborhood greeted him with smiles and admiration, calling him a hero. His story had spread far and wide, inspiring others to stand up for what was right. In the final moments of the story, Malik sat with his mother at their kitchen table. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You've shown the world what it means to be brave." Malik nodded, a small smile on his face. "You taught me that, Mom." The camera pans out as they sit together. A small family that stood up against a giant and won.